Welcome again to Boxing Squared. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Michael Hunter and Sergey Kuzmin fight, which features on the Devin Haney undercard in New York on Friday night. And this is a Friday night fight card. So this fight between Hunter and Kuzmin, for me, it's a really good fight. It's the most competitive heavyweight fight over the next few days. This is a good one, and for both, it really does mean a lot, because both are in need, in my view, of a name like each other to take themselves to that next step in the heavyweight division. And I'll come to that a bit later in the video. But I do like this matchup. It is pretty much a 50-50. I'm slightly favouring Michael Hunter. Maybe some will say it's a 60-40 or a 55-45, but compared to what else is on in the division this weekend, certainly one of the most, if not the most, competitive fight on offer. And it should be a good one in terms of action. Michael Hunter, with his style, never really seems to disappoint on the action front. And in Sergey Kuzmin, he's going to be facing a big puncher, but Kuzmin is really coming off a few performances where he hasn't really sparkled. But I do like this fight, and I like the opportunity for both to get to that next step in the division. And Michael Hunter had this to say at the press conference.
This is going to be a very big step up for me as far as being in the heavyweight division. I mean, the dude is bigger and stronger. He has a lot more experience than I do. But I took this fight knowing all this, and I just want to prove myself. I've always tried to challenge myself to the highest degree. So I know this is not going to be an easy fight.
In terms of Sergey Kuzmin, he said, "I've had a great camp. I'm looking forward to a great show. It's a dream come true to be here on Friday night. I thank my opponent Michael Hunter. On Friday, he will feel and understand what Russian power feels like." And if we actually just start with Michael Hunter in terms of his recent activity, his recent form, there's actually not too much to speak of. He's only had one fight in 2019, similar to Sergey Kuzmin actually, and that fight came in May against Fabio Maldonado. He took him out in about 2 rounds. That was a card that also featured Filip Hrgović. Those couple of heavyweight fights, I think there was about 3 rounds collectively, but it was an impressive stoppage by Michael Hunter. No one had really sort of starched Maldonado in that sort of fashion. Maldonado, though, to be fair, it looked like he wasn't in great shape, but it kind of felt like to me that Fabio Maldonado, who was an aging heavyweight, who'd only recently come back to boxing from other combat sport, that he was looking to sort of sell his reasonably good-looking record on paper. He was 26-2. It looked like he was selling it for a payday. When he had come back from combat sports, mixed martial arts, he was 25-0. He had a fight against Oscar Rivas. He lost that. Then he had a fight against Alexander Teslenko. He lost that. And coming into the Michael Hunter fight, he'd lost those 2 fights on the bounce, but he had taken those guys the distance. Rivas, a noted puncher. Teslenko, he's a decent fighter as well. But Michael Hunter really did do a number on Maldonado, took him out in 2 rounds. It was an impressive victory. He'd done something no one had ever done to Maldonado. But prior to that, his last fight had been in 2018, November 2018, against Alexander Ustinov, a fight he won in 9 rounds, stopping the big Russian in pretty emphatic fashion. It was a bit of a mismatch in the end. A faded, jaded Alexander Ustinov never really looked in the fight. Ultimately, he was taken out. And prior to that, there was the victory over Martin Bakole. And that fight was the one that really announced Hunter to the division. Got people sort of looking over their shoulder, taking note of this guy who'd been a former cruiserweight. He'd moved up to heavyweight. He'd had a couple of fights, but he was still relatively under the radar. But that Bakole fight got him some real momentum. The Ustinov fight, which he came in at short notice, continued it, but then he sort of just drifted off the mat for about 6 months, had 2 rounds against Maldonado, and now the Sergey Kuzmin fight is only his second of 2019, and he really hasn't had much action, much form in 2019 to speak of. But so too for Sergey Kuzmin. He's obviously only had one fight in 2019. That was against Joey Dawecko. That was back in March. That was a majority decision that fell to him, but very controversial fight in terms of the result. A number of people thought that Dawecko actually had outboxed Sergey Kuzmin here. It wasn't a pretty fight. It wasn't great action. And Sergey Kuzmin has actually had a number of these fights where he sort of has fallen short of expectations. He's had a number of fights on TV now where he kind of has the opportunity has sort of slipped him and passed him by. I note back to 2017, he had a fight with Amir Mansour. That looked like a perfect opportunity in a crossroads fight for both to really sort of stake a claim in the heavyweight division. It ended in cuts. That was only in the third round. Hadn't really even got going. And then he had some more bad luck with David Price in 2018 when he faced him on a undercard at Wembley, and David Price pulled out of that fight after 4 rounds. He was carrying an injury heading into the fight, a right arm injury. So it was another fight where it was, hadn't really sort of started to get going, but it was competitive before it ended, but no one really had got the ascendancy. And then the Dueco fight, which obviously somewhat controversial, and he didn't look good. That was a really sort of ugly and dour performance by Kuzmin. The only decent performance of late that he's had was against LaRon Mitchell in November 2018, but that was at a casino and it wasn't televised, and he knocked LaRon Mitchell down about half a dozen times before he got the knockout in the 6th round. So Kuzmin has really got something to prove here. It's another opportunity for him to get onto the big stage, have a lot of people see him fight, and for him to prove that he belongs in this level. Kuzmin himself was a very talented amateur, very well regarded, had some decent wins, but sort of translating that over to the heavyweight division in the pros, he's had a couple of decent wins, he's got a couple of decent wins on his record, but obviously he's had a few circumstances not go his way and a few ugly performances. So he needs to really sort of impress. He's on a co-promotional deal, sort of working with Matchroom at the moment, and if he wants to get to that next step, he really needs to win here, but also I think he needs to look good, because if Sergey Kuzmin comes into this fight and it ends up being another sort of stinker, it's going to be very hard to market him. I mean, a lot of people have high expectations that when Alexander Povetkin retires, that Sergey Kuzmin is the obvious heir apparent to be the sort of top guy, the top Russian guy, sort of taking over that mantle from Povetkin. But from what we've seen of late, he's looked a little bit shaky. The performances haven't been stellar. And for this fight, I guess, will this actually be a barn burner? It's a little bit hard to say. I mean, I think Sergey Kuzmin is going to be sort of tracking forward. He will be, obviously using his jab. He's not going to be doing anything crazy. But I actually think that Michael Hunter is the one that's really going to be sort of pushing the action here. I think it'll be a very sort of similar sort of fight strategy that he had against Martin Bakole, where he will be using angles. He'll be looking to work the body and the head with jabs. And he actually does have the bigger reach here, even though he's the smaller guy. So Kuzmin 6'4", 75.5-inch reach, but Michael Hunter 6'2", 79.5-inch reach. So Hunter is going to have the longer reach by 4 inches, and I think that is going to play a factor in this fight, because I think Hunter will be able to sort of pot shot from the outside. He will also look to sort of nip in, and he'll be sniping away. I think he really will be looking to sort of pepper Kuzmin with the jab, but also looking to set up his right hand, and he sort of throws some of these punches from awkward angles, as Bakole found out. And he'll have to be careful though, because Kuzmin is a big puncher. He can actually, counter really well. So if Michael Hunter is a little bit reckless, or is maybe a lot reckless, he could get clipped. And we did see a lot of calculated risk taking, especially in that fight against Martin Bakole. Even in that Alexander Ustinov fight, there was a lot of activity by Hunter where you sort of thought if someone was a better mover, if they could actually sort of counter, they'd have more success. But I guess with Kuzmin, his movement and his footwork will be key, because if he can't really sort of mix it with Hunter on the footwork front, I think he will find it hard to catch up with him. And to be fair, I think, Kuzmin can look a little bit flat-footed at times. But I do think that this is a competitive fight, and I think especially those first 6 rounds, I think it will be very competitive. But I think as Hunter starts to maybe wear Kuzmin down, especially work to the body, I think he will start to take over, and I could actually see this one ending in a points decision to Michael Hunter. So I am predicting that he will beat Sergey Kuzmin. He will sort of be the one to move on to bigger and better fights. I mean, I could be proved wrong here. I mean, it's boxing after all, but I sort of just look at what they're bringing here, and that reach advantage, I think that's going to be so key in this fight. And with Hunter's fast hands, his movement, sort of coming in and out of range, and there will be some, calculated risk that he'll be taking. But I think he will be able to outpoint Sergey Kuzmin. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.